for speaking to us this evening. What did you make of the intention the Prime Minister set out and the practical hurdles that lie ahead for turning that into a levelled up country?
Well, I always welcome the Prime Minister doing a speech on levelling up. I think the real challenge now, he's 2 years into his premiership, is for him to set out a very comprehensive plan on how he wants to go about levelling up Britain. It's a complex challenge, and as you started to get into in that package, different parts of the country will face very different challenges. If you're in rural areas, it's probably very much about connectivity. If you're in urban areas, it's much more about whether you've got affordable housing and access to opportunity. So what he really needs to do is set out a national architecture. All the work we've been doing through the Social Mobility Pledge with businesses and universities have set out 14 levelling up goals. They're education, some around access to opportunity, some are around the other things that make or break whether we can reach our potential around the digital divide, housing, health and well-being. But in breaking down the levelling up challenge into distinct levelling up goals, then we can start to, as a country, have plans to tackle each of them in turn. And local regions, local communities can say which of these levelling up goals really will make the difference to us in closing the gaps between people who have access to opportunity and can get on in life and all of those who can't. And I think it's about having a national architecture. That's what we need set out, I think, by the government, that then local communities can tailor for their own particular local challenges. I think the other thing to say is it's not just about government. A big part of the levelling up agenda has to be delivered by change in how businesses are, whether or not they're really open to that wider talent, whether they're removing barriers that are there for recruiting that talent, whether they're really focused on making sure that, for example, people starting careers in lower skilled jobs don't get trapped in those low skilled jobs, and that for them there's also the chance to progress into a proper career. So there's lots of different aspects of levelling up. It's complicated, but we'll succeed by breaking it down into these levelling up goals and then having plans against each of them and measuring our progress.
I'm interested by what you say about the need for very specific sets of plans or a kind of a structure for people to apply. How important is it to have something that specific if you want to drive an ambitious reform like this through the machinery of government? Because a lot of ministers in the past have talked about the frustrations they found with what they saw, and some people have a more pejorative term for it. I would simply call it inertia in the system, that sometimes that actually is what really scuppers it. Do you need that kind of structure in order to be able to overcome that inertia?
I think you do, because in a sense it's about moving away from this Tower of Babel where everyone's got their own language and their own priorities, to saying actually collectively we've agreed that there are two priorities for Britain. One's net zero planet, the other is levelling up people, and therefore every government department needs to look through those two lenses and say, what is our contribution to that national agenda? And that then can line up with all the work that I'm doing, for example, with businesses, with universities, with civil society. And actually it's bringing all of that together that is how we'll really get change on the ground, and recognising that different parts of our system, if I can call it that, have different roles to play and different leadership in it. But you're not going to get change on the ground unless you manage this complexity and start to break it down so that we can really take each part in turn and tackle it.
Is there a risk for the Prime Minister in this, in that he's kind of nailed his colours so firmly to the mast on this, and yet, as you said, it's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve? It may be an admirable thing to want to do, but actually putting it into practice, as a lot of those statistics show, because they haven't shifted for years and years and years, suggests it might be a kind of a too big a nut to crack. It's certainly in one term.
Well, it is a long-term agenda. I don't believe it's too big a nut to crack. But the reason there's almost this status quo in Britain of inequality of opportunity is because you need a system fix. I mean, we're talking about shifting how this country works today to become a very different version of itself. And that means not taking things in a piecemeal fashion with ad hoc policies here and there. It means government collectively working on the same agenda, but then marrying that up with what's happening outside of government. And then actually, as the Prime Minister was saying today, understanding that you have to have a place-based lens on all of this, which is different parts of the country will face different levelling up challenges. But that's why you need this common architecture that we can use everywhere, but can be tailored to what particular regions and communities have as particular levelling up challenges. And I think that's the route through. And it is complicated, Sean. It's why successive governments have had good intentions on closing these gaps but failed. And I'm afraid government across the board and politics needs to up its game on delivering complex change. But it can do that by having a much more systematic approach and being prepared to work more carefully with businesses and universities and charities who are outside of Westminster, but absolutely determined to also achieve the same goals.
Justine Greening, good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.